The March 23rd episode of Beyond the Gates opens under a heavy cloud hanging over Fairmont Crest, as Anita's condition continues to worsen and fear begins to seep into relationships that once seemed seasoned enough to survive any storm. At the very moment the Dupree family is facing one of its most painful trials, Bill and Dany unexpectedly find each other a source of support that perhaps neither of them ever imagined they would need again. Their heartfelt conversations does more than reflect a bond that has never completely faded. It also reveals that when a crisis touches the person one loves most, distance, wounds, and pride can all be pushed aside to make room for something deeper and more human: understanding. But while Bill and Dany try to hold themselves together in the middle of an emotional storm, an urgent call from the hospital suddenly rings out, igniting fresh panic and casting a new wave of unease all over a Fairmont Crest. Elsewhere, Joey moves closer to Vanessa at the exact moment she is at her most vulnerable, creating what seems like a gentle moment of comfort, yet one that could easily lead to far more complicated emotional consequences. All of it points to an intense episode in which Anita's decline does not simply wound one family, but forces everyone around her to confront the most honest and fragile parts of themselves. No one in Fairmont Crest could have prepared themselves for the feeling of watching an empire begin to crack from within when the woman who once held the entire family steady suddenly becomes fragile in the face of illness. The Dupree mansion remains as magnificent as ever, its hallways still glowing, its glass windows still reflecting a life that appears flawless from the outside, yet beneath all that polished elegance lies an atmosphere so heavy it feels impossible to breathe, as if one more piece of bad news could bring the family's entire emotional foundation crashing down beyond repair. At the center of that storm stands Anita. The woman who has long been the heart, the pride, the order, and the strength of the dynasty is now being forced into a battle where money, status, and reputation are all utterly powerless. The Red Devil treatment is not only ravaging her body, but quietly draining the emotional strength of everyone who loves her. Every wave of pain, every moment of exhaustion, every sign of collapse from Anita feels like a blade cutting into the hearts of those around her who are still desperately clinging to hope. And in that very moment of fragility, people who once seemed severed from one another are being pulled back together by an invisible force called crisis. Bill understands that more clearly than anyone, whether he wants to admit it or not. His conversation with Anita is not simply a touching moment. It feels more like a silent judgment, one that forces him to look back at every dark and bright part of himself. Anita is not only Dany's mother, not only a powerful member of the family who once embraced him as one of their own, but also a mirror reflecting the choices he has made, the wounds he has inflicted, and the things he still has not found the courage to repair. Standing before Anita as she grows weaker by the day, Bill suddenly feels the terrifying truth that some doors, if not stepped through now, will close forever. The sincerity between them does not come from peace. It comes from fear, the fear of losing the final chance to say what needs to be said. The fear that once Anita no longer has the strength to listen, all of his regrets will remain trapped in silence forever. But it is precisely that conversation that pushes Bill closer to Dany than ever before. He does not turn to her only out of habit, nor entirely out of kindness. That is what makes everything so dangerous. If Bill were simply there to comfort her, perhaps the situation could be easier to control. But deep inside him lies a tangle of emotions that has never truly been resolved. Anita's crisis strips that truth bare. In his darkest moments, Bill still turns back toward Dany as though instinct itself has never changed. Not because he does not have a new life, but because the deepest part of his heart seems never to have left that place. The connection between them is not romantic in any simple or beautiful sense. It is dangerous, painful, and loaded with the power to destroy. They know each other's weaknesses too well. They remember enough of the good is to soften, but also enough of the damage is to burn with anger. That is why sincere conversation between them could never be healing. It always carries the power to tear open old wounds that had barely begun to close. Dany is the one who feels that pull most sharply. She has lived long enough with the pain Bill left behind to understand that growing close to him now could lead to yet another mistake, another moment of weakness, another fracture in the self-respect it took her so long to build. But the cruelty of the situation lies in the fact that she is no longer standing in her usual strength. Anita's medical crisis has already shattered so many of her defenses. Watching her mother struggle through pain, feeling helplessness invade every breath, Dany is no longer simply the sharp, guarded woman who builds walls around her heart. She becomes a frightened daughter, a woman terrified of losing the greatest pillar of her life. And in that condition, Bill's presence is not just the face of a man from her past. He becomes a familiar source of support, and that familiarity is the most dangerous thing of all, because it blurs the line between safety and dependence, between empathy and relapse, between old love and surrendering to something she once swore she would never return to.
The closer Bill gets to Dany during this time, the more he realizes he is entering an emotional territory he cannot pretend to control. He may tell himself he is there because of Anita, because of responsibility, because he still cares about a family he was once tied to, but every glance from Dany, every moment they share their worrying over Anita, every heavy silence between them reminds him that some ties were never truly broken. That does not bring him peace. It fills him with anger toward himself. Because returning to Dany at a moment like this, even emotionally, means admitting that all the ruthless choices he made before never truly set him free. His heart remains lodged in a place his mind once tried to burn down just to escape. The more Bill tries to convince himself this is only old loyalty, the clearer it becomes that the excuse is painfully weak. And when a man can no longer trust his own motives, every move he makes becomes fuel for a fresh disaster. Meanwhile, Anita is fighting on a quieter yet even more brutal battlefield. Her decision to personally contact Monica McCormick is not merely a step forward in treatment. It is a sign of a violent internal reckoning she is not yet ready to reveal to her family. Anita has never been the type of woman who easily hands control of her fate over to others. All her life, she has been the one making decisions, setting the rhythm, and making everyone else feel secure. So the fact that she reaches out to Monica herself and seriously seeks guidance about her condition suggests that she has sensed a danger she can no longer afford to dismiss. Perhaps it is the fear that the illness has advanced beyond what the family knows. Perhaps it is the instinct of a woman too intelligent not to recognize the darkest signals coming from her own body. Or perhaps it is a quiet preparation for a possibility she is still not ready to speak aloud. Anita still wants to fight, but that choice carries another painful layer. Even the strongest warrior must eventually admit that this battle may no longer be entirely hers to command. What makes the situation even more unstable is that the Dupree family is not only facing illness, but also the terror of losing control over fate itself. Everyone wants what is best for Anita, yet what is best is no longer as clear as it once seemed. Should they keep her at home so she remains surrounded by the people she loves, or take her back to the hospital for closer monitoring? Should they encourage her to keep fighting, or respect the truth that her body is becoming exhausted? Should they trust Anita's willpower, or prepare for the possibility no one dares to name? These questions do not only break the family's heart, they also quietly stir deeper conflicts. In a strong family, crisis does not only expose love, it exposes power. Who gets to decide? Whose voice matters most? Who truly understands Anita? Who is clinging to hope simply because they are too afraid to face reality? And within that field of conflict, Bill drawing close to Dany again only makes everything more complicated. His presence is not neutral. It carries history, guilt, longing, and the dangerous potential to awaken emotions that, at a time like this, should probably remain buried. On another branch of this storm, the urgent call Smitty receives from the hospital immediately opens the door to a new kind of terror. Calls like that never bring anything gentle. They freeze time for the first few seconds before every worst-case thought rushes in at once. Given Monica's close connection with Smitty and Martin, the hospital contacting him first may come from trust, or perhaps from the sheer urgency of the situation. If the call is about Anita, then it means her condition may have reached a turning point where every bleak prediction suddenly feels closer than ever. But the unease does not end there. Because while Jacob is immersed in a dangerous secret mission, the hospital may also become the gateway to a much darker truth. Jacob is the kind of person who takes the risk onto himself without giving the people who love him any chance to prepare. His mission is not only dangerous because of what he faces, but because of the price others may have to pay if he fails. That is what makes the possibility of the urgent call being connected to Jacob so haunting. If he is injured, if his cover has been blown, if one mistake in the mission triggers a chain reaction, then the hospital is no longer simply a place for physical emergency care. It becomes the starting point for a larger crisis involving trust, safety, and secrets that were never meant to surface. And the most frightening question is not what happened to Jacob, but who will pay for it if everything collapses. In secret operations, the one lying in the hospital bed is not always the one who suffers most. The most devastated person may be the one left behind, the one forced to absorb the rage, the one who becomes the next target of revenge, or the one who must continue hiding the truth in order to protect the mission that has already begun to rot from within. Smitty understands that cruel nature of crisis. When he reacts immediately after the call, it is not only the reflex of a responsible man, but also the expression of fear that has been building inside him for far too long. People like Smitty are often pushed into the role of the calm one, the one who steadies everyone else, yet they are usually the ones carrying the deepest silent pressure. If Anita is critical, he must be strong. If Jacob is in danger, he must deal with it. If the hospital is concealing a truth far more complicated, he must be the one clear-headed enough to connect the pieces. But the more roles a person is forced to carry, the easier it becomes to reach a breaking point. And when the one who always appears calm begins to waver, it means the reality is far more serious than anyone wants to admit. At the same time, in another corner of this unraveling world, Vanessa is slipping deeper into emotional isolation. Her pain is not loud in the way a hospital emergency is loud, but it gnaws at her bit by bit like a slow destruction. Being publicly lashed out at by her daughter is already a brutal blow. But what truly devastates Vanessa is the feeling that she is being stripped away from the very family she once tried to hold together. She is not only hurt because Deanna is angry. She is hurt because that anger is so public, so merciless, so much like a sentence being handed down in front of witnesses. In that moment, Vanessa is no longer simply a mother who may have made mistakes and could still make things right. She becomes the object of judgment. And the more she is forced into that position, the more she withdraws from her own mother and from every voice around her, using distance as a fragile last attempt to preserve what remains of her damaged dignity. And once again, Joey is the one who stays by her side. On the surface, that might seem simple. In truth, it holds something far more delicate and dangerous. A man who always appears at the precise moment a woman is at her weakest is rarely only a temporary source of comfort. Repetition creates habit, and habit creates dependence. Joey may begin with genuine concern, but the deeper he steps into the role of Vanessa's rescuer, the more likely he is to become something she cannot easily separate herself from. That is exactly the kind of emotional terrain where subtle but powerful shifts begin to grow. For Vanessa, Joey offers a sense of steadiness her own family can no longer give her. He appears when she is wounded, listens when she no longer knows whom to trust, and does not accuse her when she is at her lowest. In times like that, comfort can easily be mistaken for salvation. But the most frightening possibility is that Joey may realize that too. And once he understands the place he holds in Vanessa's life, their connection may stop being harmless altogether. Deanna's anger is not as simple as it appears either. Public explosions rarely come from a passing misunderstanding. Beneath that fury may lie the feeling of betrayal, abandonment, or worse, the sense that she has stumbled onto a truth she cannot yet fully prove. People do not erupt that violently over small disappointments. They do it when something bitter has been festering inside them, when they believe they have been deceived, diminished, or denied the right to know the truth. That is why the conflict between Deanna and Vanessa is not merely a clash between mother and daughter. It feels more like a confrontation between two wounded versions of love, where one uses anger to demand justice while the other uses silence to conceal collapse. And in that space of silence, Joey steps in, not through force, but through steady presence, which can sometimes be more dangerous than any direct temptation. All of these storylines, though they seem separate, are in fact tied together by the same red thread. When human beings face the threat of loss, they instinctively return to the thing that hurts them most and yet feels most familiar. Bill returns to Dany. Dany wavers between reason and memory. Anita reaches out to Monica as if quietly preparing for a truth she is not ready for her family to hear. Smitty runs toward the urgent hospital call like a man who understands that one more mistake could trigger disaster. Jacob may be standing at the edge of a secret so dangerous that the hospital becomes the first visible sight of its consequences. Vanessa collapses into isolation. Joey moves closer through repeated acts of comfort. Deanna unleashes her rage as though she is willing to risk everything just to force the truth into the light. None of them is standing in safety anymore. Each of them has been pushed to the edge of themselves, to a place where the next decision may no longer come from clarity, but from pain, anger, fear, and the feeling of betrayal. And that is exactly what makes everything so explosive. In this world, a medical crisis is never only about life and death. It is a catalyst that melts down everything once held together by dignity, pride, distance, and promises. Anita may be fighting to stay alive, but she may also be quietly arranging things for a goodbye she is not yet cruel enough to speak aloud. Bill may tell himself he is returning out of old loyalty, but the closer he gets to Dany, the more he reveals that his heart never truly left. Dany may try to keep her distance, but in the weakest moments, people often betray their own principles. Smitty may answer the call as a man prepared to manage a crisis, yet what waits for him on the other end may be a truth powerful enough to destroy every fragile balance still left. Joey may only be comforting Vanessa, but repeated comfort always carries the risk of becoming a form of emotional possession. And Deanna may be dismissed as reckless, but sometimes the person who rages the loudest is also the one standing closest to the truth. Fairmont Crest will continue to look glamorous in the eyes of outsiders, but inside, every heartbeat is racing toward catastrophe. A mother is fighting an illness that is tightening its grip on her life. A man is drifting back toward his past while his present remains far from settled. A woman is struggling not to collapse while worrying for her mother and resisting the softness she still feels toward the man who once broke her. One urgent call may change the course of many lives. A secret from a dangerous mission may pull an entire family into a spiral of consequence. A comforting connection may become a knee emotional trap. And one public outburst of anger may be the opening gunshot to a truth that could make everyone pay. The harder they try to keep everything under control, the closer they are pushed toward the edge. And when people who are proud, powerful, and used to control begin to lose their grip on their own lives, their next response is rarely calm. It becomes anger, desperation, suspicion, possession, impulsive choices disguised as love. That is when the real tragedy begins.